This week on the Oatmeal Raisin Conspiracy.
Why am I suddenly always the one doing the intros?
Because you've always done the intros, you've just never done them well. Hi, Hank.
Oh. That's true. It's Dennis's fault tonight.
He's not here to defend himself.
That's what you do at a meeting when somebody's not there. That's the person you throw under the bus. Yes, I'm the janitor of this profession.
I will still debate on whether or not I want to spend $100 on a special edition hardcover re-release of a book that I already have a copy of.
Really? You call yourself a fan of this? Really?
Only 12. The first 12 were out, and I read them in 2 weeks.
Seriously? No. Go away. Get out of my face.
Personal experience of mine. Dennis and I went to go to a Jim Butcher signing that was just northwest of Chicago.
Really, kid? I've been doing this half your life. You're trying to tell me what this is?
Why am I suddenly always the one doing the intros?
Because you've always done the intros, you've just never done them well. Hi, Hank.
Oh. That's true. Hi, Hank. Today we have Richard Sheely. I asked in advance, so I didn't butcher his name this time. He is a copy editor of science fiction and fantasy books and general nerd and geek. Had this kind of plan in advance, wanted to get a wide variety of people. We were doing mostly authors. Now we've had a director, and now we have somebody who works behind the scenes with authors. So, Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And sorry for the late start as I break the fourth wall.
It's because Dennis fucked up. It's all his fault.
Yeah. We're going to blame everything on Dennis tonight. Usually I'm the one taking the blame, but it's Dennis's fault tonight.
He's not here to defend himself.
That's what you do at a meeting when somebody's not there. That's the person you throw under the bus.
Yep.
And, that seems to be a running theme with this show, because the times that I'm not on, I get made fun of and blamed for things that I can't fucking defend myself against. And then I forget by the next week. So it just stands as my blame.
It's the perfect crime.
To start out, to talk about, because I am like 90% of the reason why I invited you on, other than our interaction on Twitter. You seem like a very personable guy, but I did want to get a sneak peek at what happens behind the scenes. And you are a copy editor, which is the first stop. Is it the first stop or is it the second stop of a novel?
It depends on the process you're talking about, depending on the author. If we're talking about an independently published author or a publishing house, and that varies from house to house too. So generally what happens is you have the writer doing his thing, and he sends it in, he submits it to the publishing house. We're just using that as the base example right now, and works with an editor, what everyone just calls the regular editor. Depending on who you're talking to in the industry, it's a developmental editor, story editor, what have you, but this is the big picture person. Someone who says, okay, this part of the story is running a little slow, this character needs to be developed, that sort of thing. And once they have all those big picture items squared away, that's when it finally comes to me, and I just take care of the nuts and bolts of the grammar, the continuity, that kind of little stuff. Just polishing, putting that last polish on the window.
So you're as you're self-proclaimed, you're the word nerd. You're the one that goes through and says, "Yeah, this is the wrong usage here, and you need a comma here," that type of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's all the little stuff that nobody really thinks about until they see it in print. Oh, that's a mistake. There's an error. Oh my God, look at all the typos in this book. This is horrible. Love the story.
You know, I've only had one or two books where I'm reading it, and it was just absolutely terrible the way that it was put together. Like, this person, for whatever reason, the editor, maybe they didn't have a copy editor, but whatever reason, they wrote the book, sent it to the publisher. Publisher just said, well, let's just pump this one out. And that's really what it felt like. There was typos, there were one character would have 3 different spellings of his name throughout the book. Like, it'd be spelled one way the first 15, 20 pages, spelled another way for the next 25 pages, and then spelled a completely different way for the rest of the book. And then it might go back to the first way it was spelled. So that you are the saving grace to people like me who get really irritated with books like that.
Well, the majority of the reading public doesn't notice if you do or don't have the serial comma, you do or don't maintain consistency about whether an ellipsis is 3 or 4 periods, that kind of crap, But you do enough of that and it gets noticed, and anything that also can possibly interfere with the reader's understanding, sometimes one little comma can make that difference. And I don't have any particular examples right on the tip of my tongue right now, but I do know the project I was copy editing earlier. This is one of my cleaner writers. When I say clean, there's very little for the copy editor to have to do. And there were still a couple of cases of, no, you need a comma there because it might be misunderstood. It's that might be that rules in this, And anything where the reader has to stop, even for a split second, and say, wait a minute, what do they mean there? That can add up to be death for the story.
Yeah, the context is probably one of the more important things, especially with science fiction and fantasy, that I've found. Like, if you have a sentence that doesn't quite fit the context of what's been going on, it can throw the rest of the story for me.
Precisely. That's the part I was calling continuity. If you have a system, it needs to remain consistent, or at least have some reason in there why it isn't consistent. Why is this an exception? It needs to work within the framework. But that's the metaphor I was using of the last polish to the window. Somebody given the different steps in the editing process as a piece of art that's going to go on display in a museum. The writer is a person who's making the art. The editor is there to say, all right, you're going to be looking to create this feeling in the person who's going to be looking at it. So you need to do this and that. And once they've gotten all that done, I'm the guy who puts the frame on it and puts a glass over and makes sure the glass is streak-free. Yes, I'm the janitor of this profession.
But as so many janitors would say, it is probably one of the most important steps in any profession, that keeping it clean, keeping it enjoyable. I actually read well, I won't say the name of the book just to save it, but I read a book by one of my favorite authors, one of my top 5 authors, where during a course of dialogue, there was a line that the gender distinction got mixed up. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I read it, I knew exactly what it was supposed to say, and it made some sense the way it was, but you could tell that the gender distinction, just one stroke of the keyboard, one letter, changed the entire meaning of that whole sentence. And it took everything I had to not call it out immediately, like contact the writer and contact the publisher, like, seriously, this page, so many lines down, what the fuck happened here? But then I thought about it, and I was like, there are so many people that are working hard to keep stuff like that from happening. To go and point it out, one of 5 books, there's one mistake, and that publisher, I think in the last year, I've probably picked up about 50 of their books, and there's one mistake. So yeah. I calm myself down. My grammar Nazi calmed down, and I moved on with the story. And it was still, a absolutely amazing story. But that was kind of what led me. It was like, I know somebody who works on this, so I need to talk to them about it. So it led me to talking more and wanting you to come on the show to talk about that.
Well, one thing you have to keep in mind is that no matter how many sets of eyes you have looking at a text, humans are going to make mistakes. Humans are going to read past stuff. And here's a perfect example. There was a trilogy that I had worked on, and the author had posted a link to a review of the trilogy, and the reviewer was very, very positive, and very thoughtful. So this is not somebody just lashing out and trying to be nasty. He started out saying, I'll begin with the negatives. I found a number of typos and other kinds of errors about once every 100 to 150 pages. And when you have one error out of 100 pages translates to about 25,000 words. We have one error out of 25,000 possibilities. That's something like a 99.996% accuracy rate.
Right.
In another profession, you think that was great. And I'm still upset with myself for missing that one little thing, because there are people out there, if they see anything that's out of order, it breaks them out of that pleasant haze of reading, and that's something you have to avoid at all costs, because the author has built this house, depending on who you're talking to. It could be a house of cards, could be a brick house, it doesn't matter. But having that one thing out of place diminishes it so much more, which is why they have the editor, the copy editor, and the proofreader. And still, things slip through. It's the nature of the beast.
And that's, I'll ask that before I ask my next question. Because I read quite often, I don't read as much as I would like to. Work and life kind of get in the way a lot of times, and just sheer laziness. I get home from work and I have an hour or two, and instead of picking up a book, I turn on the TV because it's easier. How do people become proofreaders? If you're familiar at all with it, if you can answer that question, how do people become proofreaders and advanced reader copy readers? Like, is that like a luck of the draw, or do you have to really fight to get that position?
Short answer, yes. Long answer is a lot more complex than that, and I can really only speak to my own experience, because I know a number of other people have gone about it different ways. The way I got into it was, I think the technical term is ass backwards. I started out in college and undergrad as a physics major, and I got talked into adding a second major in, of all things, French. I ended up shifting completely into that, and I went to grad school in French, discovered linguistics, and as I said, I've always been a word nerd, so language is my thing, and did grad work in ethnolinguistics and taught for a while. I was a translator for over a decade, but all this time I was reading genre fiction, fantasy, science fiction, all the subgenres involved. And I ended up being in the right place at the right time, talking to the right person, and I became a beta reader for, I'm not going to share the name, but let's just say a New York Times best-selling author. As I said, I was lucky as hell to get into that. Right place, right time, right person, all that kind of thing. And when I came on that team, the first thing I did, he submits chapter by chapter, and we read that as he goes and provide feedback. What did you like? Why? What didn't you like? Why? And any other comments or concerns. And when I first started, I was finding all the grammar errors, the punctuation issues, that kind of thing, the little particulate matter. And he finally said, no, man, we don't need that. Let's let the copy editor earn his living. Okay. Doesn't look like he's been doing it so far, but I hear what you're saying. Yeah, I was kind of arrogant about it. I really was. And I was doing that for a number of years. And the day job I was in at that point, let's make a long story not quite as long and say the atmosphere was getting toxic and I was looking to get out. And I finally discovered the existence of copy editors, not proofreaders. The rest of the world would think of us as proofreaders because, I mean, let's be honest. Not many people work in the publishing industry. And everybody else says proofreader, so that's what you understand. So I asked around and made a couple of contacts and came in with my arrogance and said, okay, you have a copy editing test, bring it to me. I failed it. Oh, my God, I was devastated. Remember when I said lifelong nerd, word nerd? Yeah. Talk about a blow to the self-worth right there. But I asked, what's wrong? That you need to look at the Chicago Manual of Style and this one other reference book called Words into Type. I spent most of 6 months studying those. Again, remember, word nerd. I did this for enjoyment. And came back, took the test, nailed it. And it wasn't so much a question of not knowing the grammar and the punctuation, but knowing the particular style. You know what I mean? It didn't necessarily make linguistic sense to do this here and that there, but this is the way everybody did it, so there it is. And ever since then, it's just been a matter of meeting more people, getting to know more names, slowly accumulating more clients, and now here I am. I'm doing this the equivalent of full-time. As a matter of fact, I was working earlier today, so I'm working evenings and weekends too, as well.
That kind of leads me to my next question, which may or may not be answerable for you, just depending on your comfort level. Can you share with us some of the books that you've worked on?
Okay. Have you read Cameron Hurley's Mirror Empire?
No, but I see it every time I go to Barnes & Noble, and I mean to pick it up because the cover looks amazing, and the synopsis looks pretty good.
It's a hell of a book, believe me. It's the Hugo winner last year, Anne Lackey's Ancillary Justice. This is very much in that vein of breaking new ground and being important because it's adjusting our view of the standards in the genre. God, let's see what else. Chuck Wendig's Miriam Black series.
I have the Cormorant, I think.
Oh my God! Start from the beginning. Read them all.
Yeah,
that was part of what really pushed me into doing this, because I was reading things like that and said, "Shit, I got to work on that."
yeah. I have 2 of his books. I don't know if I have the whole Miriam Black or the first Miriam Black. I know. Actually, I took a picture of it for Twitter when I bought them. Let me see if I can find them. But go ahead and continue on with your.
The 3 he's got out right now are Blackbirds, Mockingbird, and the Cormorant. The next one is Thunderbird, and that's I believe he's just finished it or is getting close to finishing it. And that's when I was incredibly pleased to find out he had asked for me specifically. So I get to brag a little bit there. Let's see. What else would you recognize? Harry Connolly's The Great Way trilogy.
Another author that I haven't started on yet.
Okay.
But I mean to every time I pass his books.
Let's see. Running down the list here. Good Lord, I've had something like 60 texts that I've worked on. The thing is, a lot of them you may or may not recognize. I've been doing a fair amount of work lately for Tor.com, if you're familiar with that. They're both the Tor website and their new shorter non-novel length fiction imprint. Worked on a good number of things on that.
I actually
go ahead.
Sorry. I actually really wanted to. I should have done it just to see, but I really wanted to fill out the application for the what was it? The assistant editor or art director? Assistant art director, I think.
Yes.
Because I have absolutely zero qualifications other than the fact that I'm relatively good at art and I read fairly voraciously. Those are my only 2 qualifications. The rest of my working career has been working in a factory, so I have no publishing experience. I have no writing experience other than the nonsense that I jot down in journals and on the internet occasionally. But I really wanted to try to work for Tor.com because that's like a dream. That's one of the 3 dream jobs for me.
Well, you remember what I said about how I got into this racket. I was a word nerd, and I read genre. That was pretty much it for my qualifications. Took the test, and they liked it, and we've moved forward from there.
Yeah, but you also have that particular spot on your resume that says you went to school for physics and language. I have yet to go to college, which has always been something that I've been wanting to do, but I just never did. Mostly because I don't think I could qualify for grants or scholarships, so I always put it off until I can afford it myself. And as anybody who's looked into going to college, you're never going to afford it yourself. So I've never gone.
Oh, believe me, I understand what you're saying. I probably never would have gone to college myself. I managed to get a scholarship, but there was no way I was going to be able to afford to go to anything on my own. So I am very fortunate in that regard. But in the end, the college experience really didn't bear on my getting this work. It really didn't have much direct relation to it. It was more the fact that all of this opened me up to the way of thinking that was necessary to be able to do this job. You know, it wasn't a qualification process so much as preparation.
Right.
A little bit of a difference there.
the of the names that I've read recently, have and I know you know Mike Cole personally.
He's an absolute great guy. If you ever get a chance to meet him in person, you will genuinely like him.
I actually at the Barnes and Noble the panel talk that they had a few months back with him, M.L. Brennan, Anton Strout, and Smiley. I can't remember his first name.
Oh, you had to ask Mark Smiley, isn't it?
Mark Smiley, yes.
Yeah, we were all at that, and
yeah,
I'm talking about if you get a chance to just talk to him face to face.
Well, I
so.
actually
Oh,
selfishly absorbed a lot of his time afterwards. There were people
good
kind
for
of
you.
milling around trying to get his attention, but I muscled my way into his sphere and basically absorbed a good portion of the time after that talking to him, and just him. I introduced myself to ML Brennan and Anton Strout briefly, but I spent most of the time talking to Mike, and we had Mike on a couple weeks ago, and I need to have because we wanted to help him promote Gemini Cell, and then I completely failed the entire interview, and we didn't talk at all about Gemini Cell. We briefly talked about the first 3 books of the series. I put my foot in my mouth repeatedly when it came to my trek and my journey into trying to join the military, and spent most of the time talking about his life as a 3-job author. Like he's Coast Guard, he works for the police, and he's also a publishing author. So I failed him immensely in that interview, and I want to get him back, but he has showed some of the greatest patience of any one of our guests when it comes to me derailing the entire episode. He showed an immense amount of patience for that, and he's by and large one of my favorite people. We've talked to Stephen Blackmore. He's up there as there's like 3 episodes that were life changing almost for me. As weird as that sounds for people listening, is that when you get to talk to people who you admire, it changes you in a way that if you didn't have that, you wouldn't understand. But we've had the opportunity to talk to Stephen Blackmore. We talked to Mike Cole. We talked to Liesl Schwartz. And I'm just name dropping now to self promotion, I guess.
Go ahead.
And we had a director on last week, James Cullen Bressak, pronounced his name correctly for the first time. And all of these people, when I send them invites, I don't really expect any of them to come back. And Craig and Dennis are kind of just, I throw them at Craig and Dennis, like, hey, I got this person on the show, you have to be at this time and this date, and they have to kind of schedule for that, because...
No offense to any of these people, but I've never heard of anybody before we interviewed them.
Craig spends a lot of his time watching Doctor Who, Mystery Science Theater, and on Reddit.
Mystery Science Theater. Oh my God, those were the days. I'm huge.
And once I'm through talking about nerdy book stuff, I'm sure you and Craig have much more in common as far as that goes. I don't remember where I was going with that. So I'll just...
It's out on the highway now.
Yeah, it's a car with no driver. So I'll change course.
Take the helm and steer us directly into the sun. Go.
I have these moments where I forget what point I'm trying to make. So we've talked about how you came to this, some of the books you've worked on. So let's get down and dirty with the let's just have conversations now about being nerds, because that's a general portion of what we talk about on the show. And you are, again, from what I've read and from what you've told me, a self-proclaimed geek. So let's get into that.
Absolutely, fire away.
Dennis and I are the tabletop gamers. Dennis is not here for whatever reason. He's probably still struggling
with him today.
Has he come back to you yet?
He has not even replied on my text message yet. So I don't know what happened. Maybe he died.
Or his computer exploded.
His machine to pieces.
That would be my guess, is he's currently throwing his computer against the wall repeatedly. But Dennis and I are the tabletop gamers. What are, just to do a typical interview question to get it started, what are some of your favorite tabletop games that you've played throughout your life?
Okay, I have a little bit of a confession to make. When it comes to tabletop gaming, I've been... purist is not the right word, but I've been very loyal to Dungeons & Dragons from the get-go, from the red box onward. Except for 4th edition, I never managed to get into 4th edition. But I played 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 3.5, and working with a friend to try to get a 5th edition game going now, and I've loved all the editions except for 4th. Sorry, I just could not bring myself to like it.
That seems to be a running theme of people that I've talked to that were D&D people, and then when 4th edition came, they just kind of said, we're going to ignore 4th edition, and we're either going to stop playing altogether, or we're just going to continue playing on old edition rule sets.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we did. I had a group. The group finally kind of fell apart a couple of years ago, so I haven't gamed in quite a while. But we stuck with 3.5 for quite a while because for us it worked. There are a lot of people who are of the opinion that is neither right nor wrong, but it's just something that worked or didn't work for them, that 3.5 was so number heavy and it was so crunchy that they just didn't like it, that it got in the way of the story. I felt differently in that if you have a number for everything already established, in my mind that always freed you up for more story. But that was just my take on it. And 5th edition looks like it took the numbers-oriented aspect of 3rd, streamlined it, and integrated a number of the good ideas from 4th. I got the 4th edition player's handbook, and I could tell it was very well constructed. They did exactly what they intended to do, which was make a Dungeons & Dragons for people who only knew MMOs. And don't mistake me, I've played MMOs too. But again, Dungeons & Dragons Online, Warhammer Online. But it just didn't fit for the people who were playing D&D as a tabletop game. You know what I'm saying?
Right. There's a whole different feel and a whole different gameplay. Dennis and I used to play Warhammer 40K tabletop, and which is what the type of gameplay that I actually prefer. I've only played one round of D&D. I've shared this story before. I'll tell it again. I went for the first time. The first time I ever played D&D, I was 19 years old, and I went with a group of my friends who were all really into. We'd played Magic all the time because that was a game that I was familiar with. We played, Risk. We played a plethora of board games. But I went with them because they were down one character for a D&D quest that they were getting ready to do. So I went with them. I said, I'll fill out my character sheet. I'll play with you. You can explain to me as we go. 45 minutes into a 2.5, almost 3-hour quest, they sacrifice my character so they can continue to move on.
Oh my god, that's horrible, and also not unusual.
Yeah, that was my introduction to D&D and playing with the D20 system. So when I started playing Warhammer with Dennis and our old group, it's a D10 plus 5, I think. Or a 2D10. I think it's a 2D10. And there's percentages, it's a percentage-based gameplay. So playing that's a preferred type of gaming for me because it's broken down to a much more simple roll system. You roll for your hit points and you roll for your percentage points. So when 5th edition came out, it was after I moved here. I only know one other person. He lives in New York that played D&D. I said, you know what? I want to try and start a group. I'm going to buy the books. So far, they have the books under control. There's not 14 of them that all cost $50 a piece. And I've enjoyed what I've read so far, and it seems like a game that I can actually either be a DM or be a comfortable player in. So, and I was familiar with the older versions, but 5th edition actually does feel like a much more streamlined and easier as far as introductory playing goes. So that I'm very interested in playing 5th edition. I just don't have the people. So.
Yeah, understandable.
I played Magic the Gathering when I was younger. That was it. Played the Happy Days game.
I still... There's a guy that I work with that has a huge deck, like several decks of Magic the Gathering. And I've been bothering him at least twice a week to bring in a deck so we could play at lunchtime. Just do like 10 hit point skirmishes instead of 20 hit points.
Right.
And he refuses to do it. But I love Magic the Gathering. I remember playing Magic the Gathering, just getting absolutely shit hammered and not even understanding the game at the end of it, just playing because it was like the reflex of putting your card down. But I was at the point, so I was so drunk at the point that I was just playing cards, and I didn't care if they were damaging or not. It was enjoyable. It was enjoyable. Those were the days.
Woo! Slap a guard! Woo!
Tap all your lands and play a creature that has nothing to do with anything, and then just get absolutely destroyed.
Oh yeah, I remember some drunk D&D too. Hey, that was party wipe central.
I
We're supposed to play all night, and we're dead, and it's 9 o'clock. What are we going to do? Drink? Okay.
I think that's a relative misconception for most people, especially people who watch Craig's favorite TV show, The Big Bang Theory.
Oh, Christ.
I love blackface. I mean, that's my favorite type of comedy.
And I'm being, for our steady listeners, they know I'm being sarcastic, but Richard, Craig has nothing good to say about Big Bang Theory or the people who act in it.
I'm not terribly pleased with it myself, but a lot of people enjoy it, so let them have their fun, and we get to point and laugh at them.
And that seems to be for the people that I know that are in the nerd culture, the geek culture, they're like, this has. And when it first started out, I actually liked the show. I liked the show because it was more comic book based. They were college professors who were super comic book nerds, and it was less, obvious reference to pop culture. The first season or two were actually pretty good. Now it's just I haven't watched it in 2 years, so.
I've tried to watch a few episodes and I couldn't do it.
See, I saw a whole thread the other day because I was just, my wife again was watching it when I was in the room and I was just pissed off at the show. So I typed in Big Bang Theory is the stupidest fucking thing I've ever seen on Google, and it gave me a whole thread about like pretty much people with the same opinion. And I think the best thing I saw in there, besides the whole blackface thing, was this is how they explain the difference between original Big Bang Theory, which was aimed for, people like us. It was actually trying to be aimed at us, and how it is now. Originally, they would have said, these are not the droids you're looking for, and moved on from the joke because you would get it if you got it. And if you didn't, that was your problem. Nowadays, they'll say something along the lines of, oh, as Obi-Wan Kenobi would have said in Star Wars to the stormtroopers when they were looking for these droids, these are not the droids you're looking for, and then laugh track.
Oh my god. Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's...
I think I'll watch it then.
Yeah.
They break it down. It's gotten to the point where, because non-nerd-specific people are enjoying the show, they break down the jokes to...
Hey, you got to know your audience.
Yeah.
And if that's audience they're shooting for, more power to them. It's just
it does make the rest of us kind of look like assholes. And I think it was you, actually. I had the Twitter interaction not too long ago about elitism in geek and nerd culture.
Oh, there's a lot of it.
And it's something that I know I struggle with. And it's come out on the show a lot because we've talked about our con experiences. And it's come up with other guests too, where we talk about, how it's a good thing that more people are getting into, the conventions and getting into the subculture of nerdiness and geek culture and gaming and comic books. It's a good thing for everybody, especially creators. But at the same time, you have people like us who have been in it for as long as we can remember. I've loved comic books. I used to collect baseball cards. I used to collect the Marvel comic book cards when they would come in the 4 sheets inside the comic books. And for people like us who grew up with this, and it got made fun of for it, and were bullied for it, it's like I can't help but be kind of an elitist asshole when I see somebody who's brand new just bought a Batman T-shirt at Hot Topic at a convention, and you know who they are. They're very obvious. I can't help but be an elitist prick because that person didn't have to literally cry and bleed for their interest, whereas I did.
It's a natural reaction, and it's perfectly understandable how you feel about that. But one of the things that have established geek culture as we know it is that long history of being marginalized. And in order to keep what we've learned to love about geek culture, we have to keep that in mind. We really have to remember, oh God, no matter how much I want to bash this guy for calling himself this when I know it's not this, I've got to not do it. I can't tell you how many times I've had that exact same impulse. Look at something. Really? Really? You call yourself a fan of this? Really? Seriously? No. Go away. Get out of my face. You want to have that reaction, but you really can't, because if you think about it, think about the first time you came across something that you really love, the first time you discovered that comic that's your favorite. think about how much was ahead of you, how much discovery was facing you, and you start to feel envious. Am I right? You look at them and say, "Oh my God, what's in front of you is amazing. I am so jealous."
Unless you discover Firefly, and then you've got one season and you're fucked.
Well, yeah, but I've been a brown coat for 10 years. Yeah, good for you.
I've actually never thought of it.
It's a natural reaction. It really is, because we've formed a culture based on being marginalized on the best of days and actually abused on the worst of days. And there's a solidarity in that shared pain and marginalization. But when it comes down to it, we're fans because we love this stuff. And when you get a chance to get somebody new into it, oh, that's something you can't pass up. It really is. There are days. I'm a big fan of the Dresden Files. I don't know if you know that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I didn't know you were a big fan, but Dennis and I are both. Dennis actually introduced me to Jim Butcher, and at the time he had only 12. The first 12 were out, and I read them in 2 weeks. I read the entire series in 2 weeks. I didn't sleep for like 2 weeks because I was too busy reading.
Yeah, it's one of those series that just grab you, you know? If you can make it through that first book, which Jim to this day wishes if he had one thing he could do over in his life, it would be to rewrite the first book, Stormfront.
Well, at this point in his career, you think that'd be possible? He could rewrite it and re-release it as like the new updated version.
It real easy.
These days, he doesn't really have the time. He is incredibly busy. He's gotten the Alera books finished. That was a couple of years ago, and he's now finished the first book in a new series, the Cinder Spires, the steampunk series.
Yeah, I haven't. Has he published any of that yet, or is that getting ready?
No. That he just finished writing that fairly recently in the past couple of months, and of course, it's going to go through the editing process and the whole publishing process. It's not like they can just slam this out to the reading public and expect to have any kind of quality product, you know?
Right.
But when it comes down to it, I can tell you this will be very worth your while. It really will. But this is what I'm talking about. With the Dresden Files, I've been a fan of the books for, God, pushing 8 years now. I came into it backwards. My wife and I saw the Sci-Fi Channel TV show first. I said, this is a pretty good show for a Sci-Fi Channel show. And she happened to notice on one of the final episodes, she said, wait, it says it's based on a series of novels by this guy named Jim Butcher. And I said, that's a pseudonym. And turned out I was wrong. But it's something I've been doing for that long, and I have the strongest knee-jerk tendency when people want to argue about it. Well, no, really, kid? I've been doing this half your life. You're trying to tell me what this is, and I have to bite my tongue. It's just such a strong knee-jerk reaction. This is something you know and you love, and you've taken really. Not to be melodramatic, you've really taken into your heart, and it means something to you. That's what geek culture is really about, something you're enthusiastic about. And you have to bite your tongue when something like that happens because you were there at some point.
And then to tie that whole thought process together, personal experience of mine, Dennis and I went to go to a Jim Butcher signing that was just northwest of Chicago. He had ended up getting a pretty wicked strain of food poisoning, so he had to cancel that arm of his signing tour. So, but we were there. We didn't know. He didn't cancel it until that day because he was hoping that he could be able to make it still. So we went to the outlet mall that it was being held at. We went to the bookstore. We picked up our books, waiting in line, and we saw a kid. He couldn't have been more than probably 16, 17, maybe 18 years old. And he was overweight, kind of, your stereotypical when you think of the stereotype of nerd in media, they're either super skinny or they're overweight.
Exactly.
He had that stereotype nerd look to him, but he was also wearing a very well crafted, handmade gray cloak. And he showed up to a signing basically in cosplay as a warden.
Nice.
And Dennis and I, our first reaction being that we were much older than this kid, our first reaction was immediately to mock him. And then we thought about it after a little bit of a laugh. We thought about it. It's like, you know what? If that were me 10 years ago, I'd be doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I would have shown up in a gray cloak, probably with a giant staff. Actually, I probably would have gone more for Dresden himself. I would have gone and made a staff and worn a long leather trench coat with various runes and other sigils burned into the leather. And then after we had that thought, we were like, maybe we should have talked to him instead of just laughed at him when he walked past. You're
just telling me right now, you just changed your opinion on the kid from he's a nerd, make fun of him, to he's not that good a nerd because he fucking half-assed it.
No, what I changed my opinion on was look at this and really it brings shame to me now that I think about it. It was like, look at this fucking dork. He's showing up to a book signing in a gray cloak, which was what the wardens wore.
Uh-huh.
And that was my knee-jerk reaction, was make fun of this kid. Because I'm older and I'm much more elite and I've been into it longer than he has and I know more than he does. And then I thought about it. My opinion change was, well, no, I would have done the exact same thing.
But
I would have done it
more
differently.
nerdy.
Well, no, I would have done it differently just because I'm that... Like, I wanted to make fucking power armor to go to C2E2 last year, but I never got around to building my vacuum former. Like, when I become a nerd, I got tattooed for Clive Barker because he's one of my favorite authors of all time. And I found him when I was 16. And from 16 to 32 now, I will still debate on whether or not I want to spend $100 on a special edition hardcover re-release of a book that I already have a copy of.
Mm-hmm.
And I go overboard. So he went at a very simple, recognizable cosplay with the gray cloak. I would have gone overboard and gone like completely ridiculous with it, but I still would have done the exact same thing. So my opinion change was make fun of him to, fuck, that's me 10 years ago.
Yeah. It's all a matter of perspective. I mean, it's like you said, your take on it would have been to go overboard, create the whole costume from soup to nuts, and this kid shows up in a cloak. But from a different perspective than yours, you might want to think, this may be the very first cosplay the kid has ever done. And the fact that he did it at all, that could be a major step. And it represents something for the geek community in general, the Dresden Files fandom in particular, and, well, all of us. We need to start seeing a little bit of ourselves in other people,
And to give him more credit, he showed up in broad daylight. It was middle of the afternoon, and there was actually two groups of people waiting for book signings. There's two book signings scheduled that day, which I'm not sure was the best planning on that bookstore's part, but they had the Barefoot Contessa was signing a cookbook that she just released there that day, and Jim Butcher was signing.
That's quite the combination.
Yeah, so he walked into a crowd of Jim Butcher fans who were you could pretty much pick out who was there for Jim Butcher and who was there for Naked Contessa or Barefoot Contessa. So he walked into Jim Butcher fans and an older crowd that were much older, in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, there to buy a cookbook and have it signed by a famous TV chef. So he showed up in cosplay in a place where no one else was in cosplay, and walked around very confidently, and I give him credit for that. And that's probably what led to my change of heart. Was he didn't get out of his car, see the group, and like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this, and like take his cloak off. He got out of his car, walked into this giant line of people wearing a gray cloak, very proudly displaying the fact that he was a Jim Butcher fan.
Or in one particularly memorable way that I've heard, he slapped his dick on the table and said, "Bring it." Got a pair the size of church bells. Thank God they're detachable. Right? The kid's got a pair of brass ones. You got to give it to him. I mean,
well, that or
we've all been through the geek thing of being embarrassed, because that's what society for so long was trying to tell us. You're a geek. You're not a real person. And for somebody to just step out and say, "Fuck it, I'm bringing it. I'm going to go full geek on this." That really takes some chutzpah, you know?
And that actually, and Craig probably has better viewpoints on that than I do, because I've always been kind of misanthropic and never really went out. But, you know, Craig, when I first met Craig, I wouldn't have thought, that guy's a nerd. Because none of us, neither, you know, Craig, Dennis, or I, none of us look like typical nerds. If we were to wear just plain t-shirts, like, you know, no logos and jeans, we wouldn't look like nerds.
You know what I normally wear?
What?
Like what I normally wear, like my Zeppelin shirts and stuff?
Yeah. Because, I mean, Craig's built like a brick shithouse. Dennis is covered in tattoos from his collarbone to his toes. And same with me. I have lots of tattoos. The only thing that separates us and distinguishes us as nerds is usually our t-shirts. Like Dennis is wearing or Craig is wearing a Game of Thrones t-shirt at the moment. I'm wearing a Doctor Who t-shirt. Can't see it, but
I'm wearing a beat up old polo shirt. Nobody would be able to tell I'm a geek right now.
Yeah.
That reminds me of, speaking of jobs that I want to go after, there's a job at a data connection place in Secaucus that a friend of ours works, me and my wife, works at. And I can't wear t-shirts, so I'd have to buy polo shirts. And ThinkGeek has recently released an entire line of polo shirts, where one's got the Death Star, one's got the Millennium Falcon. Yeah, ThinkGeek has got, for all their failures with the overabundance of TARDIS material, they have a line of polo shirts that are absolutely stunning, because it's just the little tiny logo right here that you wouldn't notice unless you knew what to look for. There's one with a green and red cross, lightsabers. What else is there? There's...
Do they have the Empire
Firefly
symbol?
One. There is an Empire symbol. There's a Rebel Alliance one. There's
you want to
a
make Mike Cole
firefly.
happy? Get him that with the Empire symbol.
I thought about buying him the Captain America towels.
You know, he thinks I'm joking, but I'm really not joking when I tell him that he's about the closest thing you're ever going to meet to an actual Captain America. He walks the walk as well as talking the talk. He's a true believer without being the zealot, you know? He believes in the things that he is doing. And Mike, if you're listening to this, I love you, man. You're awesome. And quit blushing.
I'll have to tell him that he was mentioned in this episode.
Well, I'll tell him that myself.
There are two guys that I work with. The guy that I want to play Magic with, and then another guy who is used to be in the Army, and I didn't know that about him until recently, because he was mad about some stuff that's been going on at work, and he's talked about going back active duty. So I talked to him a little bit, and then I asked him, I was like, "Well, do you like to read?" You know, because that's one of my first questions in getting to know people, and whether or not I'm probably going to like them or not, is Craig and my wife are probably the only two people that I associate with that don't read a lot. My wife doesn't read at all, but and Craig reads his favorite core section of books, like Isaac Asimov, and then he refuses gifts like a first edition Isaac Asimov that I found.
Well, I feel bad, you know. So.
Because he's an e-reader.
Yeah, well, there's that, and I don't know. I don't read a lot of Isaac Asimov. I've read some of his stuff, not a lot of it.
I thought Isaac Asimov was one of your favorites.
No. What's his name? Not Isaac Asimov. God damn it! I can't think of his name.
P.K. Dick.
Philip K. Dick.
What did he write? Wait, who?
PKD.
Oh, Philip K. Dick.
Dick.
Yeah.
No, that's not.
The
him.
Android's Dream of... No, not him. Ray Bradbury?
No. He wrote 2001, and I'm completely blanking, and I don't know why.
Clarke. Arthur C. Clarke.
Yes. I've read almost everything he's written.
I think I found.
You know, I really wish he had stopped with Rama after the first book.
I don't know. I didn't hate the other three.
I didn't hate them, but if he had left it after that first book, it would have just been left as, this is one of the great things ever.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, his prose, to me, the writing itself, not really a fan, but the ideas and the concepts and the general shape of the story, I like a lot. And he kind of got bogged down after the first book. To me, it's a lot like Frank Herbert's Dune books. If he had stopped after the first one, I would have been a happy man, because that one was just mind-blowingly different. And then after that, he just, again, another one who just got bogged down. But that's my opinion.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who will disagree on that, and, you know, they have their valid points. But, sorry, go ahead. I interrupted.
That's all right. The only thing I was trying to read that. I don't know what Travis was, where he went, but he'll be back.
Well, no,
but yeah.
The first Dune was the only Dune that I've read and the only Dune that I own, and I plan on rereading it soon. It's on my to-be-read stack, but that's also like 80 books high now, so figuring out which one is next is always difficult.
Oh, Travis, the unit polo's on sale.
Huh?
The unit polo's on sale.
Oh, yeah?
I'm looking at these polo shirts you talked about. It's the only one on sale, too.
Wait, The what?
The Think
polo?
Geek polo shirts.
Unit from Doctor Who. From like
Okay.
from like third and fourth.
I'm
Doctors.
going to make a confession here. Don't shoot me or anything. I'm not a Whovian.
Oh, that's fine.
That's
I don't
one...
hate it. I've watched many an episode, and I haven't walked away wanting to slit my own throat or anything. It just doesn't do much.
Did you watch the old stuff or the new stuff?
But that's me.
I'm sorry, Richard. We gotta end the interview right now.
Something on all of it. Oh, sorry, man.
No,
My
Doctor
wife
Who
is
is
a
actually
big Whovian.
It's one of those things where it's not for everybody. Like me, I remember watching episodes when I was a kid, and then I didn't even know Doctor Who was still going for fucking probably 20 years of my life. And then when I started hanging out with Dennis and Craig, they are still big Doctor Who fans. So I started watching again, and I watched from the beginning of Matt Tennant's, or Matt Smith, sorry, not David Tennant. Matt Smith, not Matt Tennant, but Matt Smith's character portraying the Doctor. And really, I got back into it. It was amazing to me. Started rewatching the old episodes and remembered all of those things that I saw on Saturday morning or Saturday night whenever it was on PBS. So I mean, Doctor Who is a common thread for us. It's one of the things that ties the three of us together. But it is one of those things where it's very specific fandom. You either like Doctor Who or you don't care for it.
See, I'm going to speak for Dennis since he's not here, but I think he only pretends. He only pretends to like it because of us.
He'll love that when he listens to he listens to the episode.
You know, he said the only
here's
reason
the
he's
question: Kirk or Picard?
Kirk.
I'm a Star Wars person. I am that stereotypical Star Wars.
Star Trek.
Well, you know, I had an existential...
It's like you're talking about, well, he's an e-reader. I read physical books and e-books. I'm bitextual.
Bitextual. I think that might need to be our next T-shirt idea. Our next T-shirt idea that has yet to be published. But bitextual. I'm gonna have to write that down. Remember that, Craig.
All
bitextual. Right. No, that's also another running theme of ours. I despise e-readers, and both Dennis is, as you say, bitextual. Craig is, when he reads a book, it's almost always on an e-reader, and I refuse. I broke down and bought Brian McLennan's short stories for the Powder Mage universe and read it on my computer, but I refused to read it on my phone. But it is, for me, I had an existential crisis when I watched the first Star Trek remake, because I grew up being a Star Wars fan. In fact, that's one of the things. I don't know if I can get the right angle. There we go. Kind of.
Oh yeah, I see.
Right here, I've got the Rebel Alliance tattooed. I grew up almost worshiping Star Wars and not liking Star Trek at all. And that was just kind of, natural for me to not like Star Trek. When I was adopted, my parents were highly religious people, so any of the science fiction and horror stuff that I liked as a kid was out the window. So even if I wanted to watch Star Trek, I couldn't. And that's Gundam, dude. That has nothing to do with anything.
Gundam is the best. You can take all the Star Trek and all the Star Wars, wrap them up, and they don't even compare to Gundam.
Okay.
So when I watched the first Star Trek remake, I had an existential crisis because I really, really liked it. It was a very good
What do you mean,
movie.
the movies that have come out recently?
Yeah.
Yeah, the first
The
of the
reboots?
two.
And I'll
And
tell
it was
you
a
why
really,
you
really
liked it.
good movie.
And I'll tell you why you liked it being a Star Wars fan. It was made as if it was a Star Wars movie. That's not a Star Trek film. I mean, it is,
No?
but it isn't. The story goes all over the place, and it's way too action-packed. And the big ship battles are actually, they look like they should be like a dogfight. It doesn't look like a naval battle like you get from like the Wrath of Khan.
All right, I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb here. I've been both Star Wars and a Star Trek fan from day one. I even liked Enterprise. Yes, go ahead and make fun.
I enjoyed the hell out of Enterprise.
But the thing that I felt most when I was watching the reboots was that, yeah, they didn't resemble any of the previous Star Trek movies at all. What they did resemble for me more than anything were the original series TV show episodes. Because I asked myself, what would they have done if they had access to today's technology in making that show?
I agree and disagree because, yeah, I see what you're saying, but at the same time, those movies were way too action-packed to be Star Trek. It wasn't about the science anymore, which Star Trek has always been about the science, and Star Wars has always been about the action. But at the same time, I understand why they made the movies that way, because nobody was going to see the other ones. No one was going to see Star Trek the way it was supposed to be in the movie.
Oh God, yeah, they were pandering to a broader audience,
Oh, yeah.
and they succeeded in that. But I saw more than enough Star Trek to keep me happy.
Oh yeah,
you know,
I agree.
And the original series, and I've been yelled at for saying this, but the original series, the science was not good.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like
it was hand waved on the best of days.
Yeah.
Now they had a story Bible that they stuck to, so they were at least fairly consistent with it. But when they needed it, when they had to have the plot wrench, they came up with one. And so in that respect, just making whatever happens in the universe fit the story they want to tell instead of the other way around, it was very much in the vein of the original show. And you have to wonder what they would have been, what the original writers would have done if they were plopped down today with today's audiences and today's technology and today's budgets. And to me, I'm not convinced that it would be too terribly different from these two movies.
Well, see,
I may be wrong. It's happened before.
But it's my favorite part of the new Star Trek movies, and this is my absolute favorite part. All these people that hated Star Trek Enterprise, it slapped every single one of them in the face because it threw out all the canon from every show except for Enterprise. Enterprise was the only one that's still canon within the new generations.
That's true.
Yep.
My one real beef with Enterprise, beyond some of their plot arcs, oh my God, they should have just thrown those out and had blank hair. But the one that I really had to grouse about was the fact that the technology on Enterprise seemed more advanced than any of the other Star Trek TV shows in many aspects. Like, what the hell?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you get that with any show when it has when it changes like the timeline like that. Like you get that with any kind of time travel, anything where they make a prequel to it. It always looks better than the original. Like look at Terminator, any of the Terminators. You know, it'll be like they keep redoing the same story with way more advanced technology. You know.
Yeah.
Or when
That's
they make
much it.
Or when it comes to video games, the same way. Like when you get they add gameplay mechanics to a prequel to another game, and it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like for the Halo series, when they made Halo Reach, everything was way more advanced than Halo 1. So
And also,
Society evolved. That's the only answer you can have.
Yeah, yeah.
No, the thing that made me laugh most about the new Star Trek reboot movies, I saw a review before I ever went to see the first one, and they were dead on. One of the complaints that this reviewer had about the movie was that the interiors on the Enterprise looked like the inside of an iPhone.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, holy crap, you're right.
Yeah, yeah.
It did. And you know what? I didn't care.
Yeah, no, because if they had the technology...
They had buried that in... They had prettified it for our eyes, but then they buried it in a lot of run-and-gun fun.
Yep. And I mean, if Roddenberry was still around, he would have had no problem with that either, because he wanted it to look futuristic, not look... Because, like, I mean, honestly, a lot of the stuff that's in the original Star Trek is pretty much what we have now. You know?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, think about it.
Look at how much of that inspired what we have now.
Yeah, yeah. Or even the
And
fact
the
that...
communicator, flip open communicator. That was the cell phone for the longest time.
Oh, yeah. What was it? I saw this short film on Sci-Fi Channel. This was back in late 90s, I think it was. It was called The Red Shirt Blues. And it was two red shirts that were stranded on a planet, right? And the one just kept complaining about the captain and how he was always saying stuff like, engage. And the guy's like, I don't know what you're talking about. He goes, yeah, a good captain would say something like that. So right there, he's making fun of the original series compared to the Next Generation. But he goes, and look at these communicators. They're covered in dials. You know, even in the late 90s, the late 20th century, they had crystal displays, you know. I was always amazed by that. I've never been able to find that show again.
Well, there's a certain amount of prophecy, and I'm actually very tickled that the conversation has gone in this direction. But there's a certain amount of prophecy in any of what we enjoyed, especially when it comes to science fiction. Because if you look at Craig Philip K. Dick being one of your favorites, he's up there. He's not your favorite, but
right.
Arthur C. Clarke.
See, now, the reason that Arthur C. Clarke was so... it seems so accurate to what they had is when he wrote, like, 2001, that was based around different discoveries they had just recently made in science fiction, or in actual, like, astrophysics and science. Same thing with every time they come up with some, like, big new discovery about our solar system, that's when he'd write another book. That's why those other 3 books were written. 2010, 61, and then 2000 or 3001. That was all based on that kind of stuff. Like Europa was brought about in 2010 after they discovered the possibility of life on the planet or on the moon.
And there's even if they had just made that discovery, Arthur C. Clarke is in a pantheon of almost prophetic writers and or creators. Star Trek, Star Wars,
well,
George Lucas,
lightsaber,
Gene Roddenberry,
and I'll be impressed.
Well, we've already established that the lightsaber is an incompatible to the laws of physics.
Yeah,
but
and Rubas don't count.
George Lucas, Gene Roddenberry, Arthur C. Clarke, H.G. Wells, Philip K. Dick. You name a 20th century or even 19th century author of science fiction, and it was almost as if they had a finger on the pulse of what's going on now, because technology has developed leaps and bounds as it is according to the law of... What's the law on technology? That it develops, it doubles or triples each year, or it doubles each...
You're talking about Moore. I think that's Moore's law, talking about
Moore's
computing power.
Yeah, all of these things, it's like they had a finger on the pulse of these things, because Star Trek, the communicators, the phasers... we now have non-lethal weapons that can be set to various settings where it's phase, stun, knockout, and there are non-lethal weapons that can be set to a lethal setting. Whether or not these creations are built upon, because as the old saying goes, be kind to the nerd because that nerd will be your boss someday. Whether or not that has anything to do with the fact that nerds are now in high power positions where they're creating the next technology, whether that's true or not, we have technology now that they talked about 20, 30, 40, 60 years ago. And it's crazy to think that being, as we're fans of a specific type of genre and reading these classic, like my dad had the collected H.G. Wells, and I had the same book in a later edition from like Barnes and Nobles or whatever, but he had it was like in the 80s, 70s or 80s edition. And being a fan of H.G. Wells from a tender age to now, it's like I read what he's doing or what he did, and I see correlations to what's happening now in the scientific community, where now we have
sure, that's been a long topic of discussion. I mean, were these people really that visionary, or was it just something that was going to be inevitable? And nobody's come up with any solid answers, but the discussions have been great fun.
Or thirdly,
it's
was it they right? were they that visionary? Was it inevitable? Or thirdly, did the advance of modern technology, those are actually pretty awesome, I have to say. Craig just shared a screenshot of coins that have their English dollars.
Looking away.
With Star
oh,
Trek.
Holy crap. Queen Elizabeth on one side, James Tiberius Kirk on the other.
But thirdly, did technology advance because the people who were developing were fans of this work? Like, hey, I love Star Trek. I want to create a working version of the taser or the communicator or the teleporter, the beam me up, Scotty. There are already there are experiments going on now where they're trying to beam carbon-based life, carbon-based forms to another place.
Yeah, they're quite a long ways off from doing that yet, but the fact that they've done the quantum teleportation is very, very promising. And it may not lead to the same thing, but my God, the discoveries along the way, those will be something. They really will be. And when it comes down to it, all of the advancing sciences, the ones that are really relying on leaps and bounds in new technology and new observations, you find countless examples of people who work in those industries and those fields who have these things in mind. They may not specifically be trying to recreate this particular thing that they read about or saw, but they'll readily tell you, this is what got me into it. Look how many people at NASA grew up watching Star Wars or Star Trek or both. And that'll give you an idea right there. We're very motivated by our childhood enjoyments. That's one of the great things about being a geek, We can actually point to the things we like and say, see, the world benefits from us.
Craig screen shares a shot of the Gundam statue. Speaking of, Richard, are you into mech fantasy at all? Like the Gundam series or any of the anime series that have?
The closest I've really come to that is the MechWarrior video game, and that's about it. And that was because my wife got me into it. There was a long time where my only exposure to geeky things was fantasy and science fiction books that I got from used bookstore as a poor grad student, and whatever happened to be on TV. I didn't have money enough to do things, and wasn't aware of most of the things. Anime, I had no idea about for many years. I didn't really, truly, honestly get into fandom until, well, hell, the time that I discovered the Dresden Files, and that started it all for me.
I got into anime and Japanese cartoons far later than most of the people I know. I think the first time that I was ever introduced to it, I was 17. My first girlfriend's brother was really into it, and he let me borrow Vampire Hunter D, and I thought that was just like the most amazing animation that I've ever seen. And then I dropped off again. Ghost in the Shell I was kind of familiar with. And then it wasn't until much, much later that I found Cowboy Bebop and Gundam and all the other various animes. But Craig,
that had to do with the second part of what I was getting toward. My first exposure to anime was Akira. And I have to admit, I didn't like anime after that because every time I tried to watch it, it just didn't measure up.
That's.
I'm dead serious. I
actually didn't
that
like
must have
Akira.
been a real exceptional thing, and I gave up on the genre. And it's only been recently that, and I say recently, past 10 years or so, that I started to become aware that it was as big a thing as it is. And I mean, hell, I even for Orbit, one of the things I fairly recently copy edited were volumes 1 and 2 in the Sword Art Online progressive manga. And I have to tell you, that was something of an eye-opener. I can really understand how that could be so well liked, which I had no clue about before. Sorry, don't with my tangent.
Well, no, I actually just heard about Sword Art Online recently, and that the artwork is amazing. I haven't actually gotten into because I tend to binge on shows when I get into them. I'll watch like 5 episodes at a time just because I can't help myself. But when it comes to anime, I actually didn't like Akira, which is when you said that it spoiled the rest of anime for you. I didn't like Akira because my first introduction was Ghost in the Shell and Vampire Hunter D, which was
vastly different.
Yeah, it's a hugely different animation style.
Yep.
Not and story style where Ghost in the Shell was serialized, Vampire Hunter D was a standalone, but they had similar animation styles. So when I watched Akira, it felt too cartoony for me because Akira is animated more in a traditional style animation, where Vampire Hunter D, Ghost in the Shell have a very highly computerized feel to them. so for me, I didn't like Akira because I didn't like the animation style. So it's strange. And then Sword Art Online, I can see where you can go from Akira to Sword Art Online, especially having worked with the manga, because I prefer mangas because they feel more like comic books, even though it's weird to read them backwards.
Sorry, I misspoke earlier. The manga novelization,
Right.
Sword Art Online Progressive. Sorry, I should have made that clear. Because realized when you were saying that, I was like, oh shit, not the same thing.
So
no,
you didn't deal with the manga itself. You dealt with
no, the novelization.
Just the words, not the art.
Bingo.
Which I actually would probably prefer, strangely enough, because I have tried to read manga before, and I've enjoyed it only because I like the art. It's a very... Of the mangas that I've read, I think I read 1 or 2 volumes of Death Note, and it was weird to read them backwards. But it felt like a comic book, but I was reading it backwards. So it's a very... with novelization being the fact that I'm currently surrounded by like 14 totes full of books, I prefer to read the words and let my mind animate or my mind create the characters instead of reading a comic book and reading. I like comic books, but not as much as I like books.
Right.
But I can see the two because I'm familiar with the art form of Sword Art Online, which is one of the reasons why I want to start watching that show. I just need to set a chunks of time. So, like I found Queen Blade. Is that the one on Netflix? Where like Queen Blade is one of those animes where it's just fan service. Like they get into a fight and suddenly everyone's naked. And it's one of those animes where like, oh, I'm going to challenge you, and then a strong gust of wind blows off all of their clothes and they fight naked. Which is always
meaning the term fan wank.
Yeah. I call it fan service just because I don't like to admit the fact that it's for, lonely boys.
Oh, come on.
So fan service leaves that ambiguity. Well, I mean, it in and of itself it's obvious, but I like to leave the ambiguity of fan service. Which leads me before we're coming up on time, and I didn't want to let, since I'm involved pretty actively on Twitter, and I talk to you fairly regularly, along with many other of the mostly authors that I talk to on Twitter. I did want to go back to take the conversation a step back and ask your opinion, only because I found myself being very conflicted and very I get angered only because it's like a fatigued anger, where I see in our community, in the science fiction and fantasy and nerd and geek community, I see this, and maybe it's just me reading it in chunks, and we've had discussions on the show before, and I just wanted to get your opinion. When it comes to the newest breed of trolling, where people get labeled as SJWs or anti-SJW, what is, in your, just from a personal perspective, how do you feel when you see authors and nerds in general get deeply involved in these conversations where you're either on one side or the other? You're either a feminist or you're a misogynist. You're a racist or you're egalitarian. coming, being as you're involved in that community personally, how do you feel when you see these sometimes just virulent threads that are confusing to almost everybody but the main characters in the main participants in that thread? How do you feel when you see that type of thing come about?
Short form, very uncomfortable. Let me unpack that a little bit. I'll try not to make it too long, since you said we were coming up on time. One of the things that I really don't like about the way society has built itself, just in my lifetime, we've become a society of polarization. There is our political system. I'll tell you right up front, I'm a moderate. And it's not because I'm dead center on everything. There are some things I'm conservative on, some things I'm liberal on, some things I could give a shit less about. And at the same time, this politics of polarization is just driving us insane as a society. There's less of standing up for something you believe in than there is standing up against what those evil other people are about. And it's, to me, kind of counter to the whole thing. We're supposed to be, in principle, yeah, I know this is pie in the sky, Pollyanna thinking, but we're supposed to be having this whole thing as a discussion. And it turns into a fight. Whatever you are for, I'm against, and everybody ends up not being for anything but against everything else. And that leads back to something that I've always hated hearing, which is, if you're not for us, you're against us. No. You're not going to force me into one thing or the other. You want to convince me to your side? Don't threaten me. And honestly, that applies to anyone and everyone. There are people on both sides of pretty much every argument who are fairly logical, reasonable people who just have their particular preference. Those are the ones you can talk to. They're also not the ones you hear. The people you hear all the time are the ones who, as I said, say you're either for me or against me, and if you're against me, I'm going to do everything I can to pull you down because you're part of the evil other. And that's about all I feel comfortable saying about that, because I have my own particular beliefs and preferences when it comes to a lot of things. And when it comes down to it, if you made me make a decision and make a choice, I'd lean more toward the, I guess you call it the social justice warrior side if you're on the other side. But it's mainly because, look, willy-nilly, like it or not, we live in a society with a whole big variety of people. And until someone does something to unearn a right or even just simple respect and courtesy, give them the same rights that you have. Because, let's face it, we're in a system where people who look like the three of us tend to have a little bit easier time of it. And I won't say it's the white man's burden kind of bullshit, but, we're kind of the people who are there benefiting from this system. And, why not bring in as much as you can and enrich an experience for everyone, because there's a lot more value with the more you have than there is with the less you have. If you keep it narrowed down to one little area, this particular cultural experience, I don't know about you, but I get fucking bored with that. You know? And
Well, that's actually
there's a kind of provincialism that I really loathe. If you're not like me, I disapprove of you.
That's actually right.
And that pretty much sums up my whole opinion on it.
That's right in the wheelhouse of kind of the way we approach things. I particularly have eaten more than just a little bit of my own foot on this show, just based on attitudes and opinions that I have that I developed at a young age from my upbringing. So it's always something that interests me to find what other people feel about it. And there are those who feel, so overprotective of who they are within a community that they won't even want to approach that question at all. And then there are those who just say, fuck, I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm gonna say what I gotta say. And I've had some interactions and some moments on, like, I'm the Twitter guy for the show, so I'm usually the one that's on Twitter the most, and I'm controlling our Twitter account. That's the most publicly available. There are two Twitter accounts. Craig auto post to our other Twitter account, but not to downplay that Twitter account. But I have had many moments where I had to stop following somebody because it felt like I was just being bashed over the head with opinion that didn't necessarily and Craig interrupts my own thought process with our that's our signal that we're right about at time. But to real quick finish up my thought, I've been in those moments where I feel like I'm being bashed over the head with opinions that don't necessarily fit into my own. They're not against my own. I just get really fatigued with hearing them on a constant basis. So to hear somebody who approaches it, and in our world we would call it the way you think as just libertarianism, because that's kind of where we go, except for Craig, who's a Republican.
Whoa.
Or a Democrat. I don't remember. I'm sorry, Democrat. But no, we're conservative on certain issues. We're liberal on other issues. As Penn Jillette puts it, you take left at sex and a right at money, and that's kind of where we try to approach these types of things. But it is comforting to know that there are people out there, as more and more people I talk to, that feel the same way. So if we could all get along, that would be fantastic, but we can't. So let's try to find a way to meet in the middle type thing.
Yeah. Whatever else happens, we are in a society, and it's, not everybody is like you, and not everybody is like me, and why make that a problem more than you absolutely have to,
Yeah, I'd like to see a more egalitarian society. I don't know if that'll happen in our lifetime, but it would be nice. But as we are had the 2-minute warning, I don't actually know how much time we have between that that announcement or not. What is it? Usually a minute?
Well, usually I give you that announcement right at 1.5 hours. We're at an hour 45.
Oh shit, we've been.
Well, I didn't want to play it off in the middle of the only serious part of the conversation we've been having for the last hour.
But we are at time. Richard, thank you so much. I know I specifically enjoyed it very much. I'll speak for Craig and say that he enjoyed his time too.
I did.
Just because we like to do that on this show. But Dennis would have loved it as well if he'd ever had
Bothered
come
to show
around and figured out his fucking computer.
I'd like to say thank you for coming on, Richard. Thank you for showing up today, Travis. Dennis, go fuck yourself. And Hank, thanks for listening.
Well, guys,
Right.
thank you very
Bye,
much
Hank.
for having me. This has been a load of fun and also very interesting. I appreciate it very much.
All right.
Anytime, Richard. We'd love to have you come back.
Cool.
All right. Bye, Hank.
Bye, Hank.